quick tip number 9. We're going to call this the no squint tip. So when I first started out, I was often told to put your subjects in the sun, facing the sun, so that they would have the nicest light on them. I'm not sure who was telling me that, and I'm not sure where that came from, but it is not good advice. It really depends a lot on the time of day. We can get into that, and we will in future videos talk about quality of light. We've touched on that in the past. But what happens when you face someone into the light or the sun is you often get some squinting or even scowling. So here I am, and these pictures weren't even taken midday. These were taken evening time. The quality of the light is actually getting not so bad, but it's still bright enough that it's causing me to squint. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to turn the person the other way around and photograph them. But then you run into an issue with a lot of these cameras, in that it looks at the scene, it sees all of this bright light coming into the camera, and it can very easily get confused, and your subject will be much darker than you want. You now have a couple of options. One is to carefully recompose, and actually that's exactly what we did in this next picture. It did not change any well, actually, we're shooting in P, so letting the camera decide what to set. But really just slightly recomposed. Didn't touch any buttons on the camera. And then you can see that it did a better job. Now again, when I was starting out, I would look at these pictures and think, oh, the background is blown out, it's too white. And the background is not my subject. In this case, I am the subject. Or when I'm taking pictures of people or objects, that is the subject. Now, if I'm taking pictures of big scenery, that's a whole different story, and you are going to be doing different settings, and of course you can be shooting towards the sun at times, but that also where a circular polarizer can be very handy, but we're going to talk about that later. So, with just a little bit of recomposing, we have a fairly nice picture. Now, then we shot in manual mode and bumped up our exposure just a little bit. I think we go from, yes, 1/125th of a second in f7, and over here we're now at 1/100th of a second, so a little bit of a slower shutter speed, letting in a little bit more light, and a wider aperture, also letting in a little bit more light. And sure, the background is even a little bit more blown out, and maybe even the top of my hair a little bit, but me, the subject of me, is much better. So that's one option, just simply overexpose a little bit. Another option is to turn your flash on. Now, it might seem a little counterintuitive to be outside in a bright sunny day and use your flash, but it can be useful. Some people don't quite like the look of these pictures, and this is why it can very easily be overdone. So I'm almost getting the red eye here, small pupils, the light is right in the center. This is partly because we're using the onboard flash, and partly because we let it decide how much power it should output. So I'm very nicely exposed now. The background is still very nicely exposed because it's not getting any of this flash. But I have that kind of flashed deer in the headlights look. It's not very good. And I'm also only partly smiling. Here is the last picture we took. We used the flash, but we used flash exposure compensation to dial it way, way down. Now let me show you how to do this on the camera. I'm going to show you how to adjust both your exposure compensation and your flash exposure. So, first is if you're shooting in P mode, adjusting your exposure is as easy as holding down the AV exposure button on the back and rotating the dial. Rotating that dial to the right will overexpose. Rotating it to the left will underexpose from what the camera thinks is the best value for that. If you're shooting in manual mode, and I've covered this before, so I'm going to be very brief about it, it's simply changing your settings until you see your exposure indicator to the right of center. In this case, you can see that it is just a little bit to the right of center. If I wanted it to be more, I could slow my shutter speed down. I'm inside in this example. I'm already at my widest aperture. I could open up my ISO. And then now you can see that it's quite a bit overexposed. To change my flash exposure compensation, I'm going to pop the flash up. I'm going to go to Menu, and in the first menu screen is the flash control. And in there we have the built-in flash settings, exposure compensation. And then you can adjust this. So the middle is the light output the flash thinks is best for the scene, and the camera does vary that light output, and less is going to be less output, and that's going to give you a more balanced look. So, quick tip on keeping people from squinting by facing them away from the sun and overexposing a little bit so that they look better, and possibly using your flash with the exposure compensation for that dialed down. If you have any questions about this or anything else that I've covered, just leave a comment down below or come over and find me on Facebook. Thanks for watching.